Hello, John Talley here with Partzilla.com. Today we're going to be looking at the clutching system on our 2011 Polaris Sportsman 850. I showed you in a previous video how to replace the belt, but today we're going to look at the symptoms and the causes if your machine isn't running right as far as the engagement of the clutching system. Basically what you have are just two main pieces. You've got the drive clutch here, and then you have the driven clutch on the back side, and it's all under a cover on the back side of the machine. So give me a few minutes, let me get the machine up in the air, get the tire pulled off, get that cover out of the way, and I'll show you how to pull these two pieces and evaluate them. Let's get started. Alright guys, before we get started, let's go over some of the tools that we're going to need to get this job done. I'll start off with a couple of specialty tools. The brand I recommend is EPI. And the two that we're going to need from them are this, it's your primary drive removal tool. With it, you'll just need a standard 22 millimeter socket to drive it in there. The other one I like is the EPI spring compressor. What that'll do, it'll hold your primary driven sheave in place while you're working on it. And the only thing you need to operate that is just a 3/4 inch, box end wrench. You also want to locate your clutch / shock adjustment tool. It should have come in your toolkit when you purchased your unit. Another thing that you may want to have handy is the owner's or the service manual that is required for your unit, just in case you need to look up a specification or something like that. All right, as far as our standard tools, you need a couple of different 10 millimeter sockets, a 15 millimeter, a 17 millimeter, and an 18 millimeter. Most of those are in 3/8 drive, except for this one 10 millimeter, which is just a 1/4 inch drive. I use the 1/4 inch to remove those cover bolts because it's smaller and it's easier to get that one in there. Other than that, you need a 2 millimeter Allen, and then the associated drives for those is either a 3/8 ratchet or a 1/4 inch ratchet with a couple of extensions. Make sure you've got one of these longer 3/8 extensions. So I'll be using that pretty much as a pry bar to hold certain pieces of the clutch in place. A couple more things you're going to need are just a good pair of pliers, a mark saw, and then a small pick tool, and just a medium-sized hammer. And that should cover all the tools that you'll need to get this project done. Alright guys, so we've got her up in the air. Went ahead and pulled both tires because you actually have 11 of these 10 millimeter bolts that hold this cover on. But before we do that, we need to go ahead and pull this, I guess you call it a frame strut. It's actually removable, and that'll allow us to get that cover off. It's only held in by 4 15 millimeter bolts. So let's get those broken loose so we can get it out of the way. Lay those to the side, and then we'll start getting those 10 millimeters off the cover. A couple of them are a little bit tricky to get to on the top side and the bottom side. Actually, I went ahead and pulled the rear lower panel on the frame, make it a little bit easier to get to. Alright, with all those 10 millimeters out of the way, just need to wrangle off this cover. There's your drive clutch, your driven clutch, and of course the belt we had put on in a previous video. Alright, to remove the belt, what we need to do is release tension on this clutch where we can open up the sheave, and then we can wrangle the belt off of there. So if you need further instruction at removing the drive belt, please refer to our drive belt removal video. Now with the belt off, you can go ahead and remove that 15 millimeter bolt all the way. Careful you don't lose your washers here. You've got your smaller one on the inside, then you've got this larger one that rides right here. Just make sure you want to keep up with those. Next, you should be able to just slide that driven clutch right off the shaft. Alright, for your drive clutch, it's actually a reverse thread. So find something to hold it still. I'm just using a 3/8 extension to do this. and that's actually an 18mm socket. This is when you will need the primary drive clutch puller tool that I talked about at the beginning to break it loose from that shaft. All you have to do is insert it, get it bottomed out. There we go. As you can tell by the amount of force that I had to use, you're just not going to pull this off by hand. You have to have that tool. Go ahead and remove the extraction tool, and she should just slide straight off. Yep. All right. Now we're going to take this over to the teardown bench and pull that spring out and get a feel for how much wear is actually on it. So give me a couple of minutes. We'll reset over at the teardown bench and get this thing pulled apart. All right, guys, welcome to the teardown bench. We've got our drive clutch as well as our driven clutch laid out on the table. How do these things work? Well, of course, there's the belt that's going in between these two. And what you're going to see when it's just sitting there idling, the belt's kind of just more or less sitting still. But as the RPMs increase, what happens, there are weights. There's 3 of them actually on the drive clutch. And then there's a spring inside of here. When this thing starts spinning faster and faster, what will happen, it overcomes the spring by those weights starting to get pushed out. And what that does, it actually causes this to clamp down. And when it clamps down, it forces the belt from the inside of the sheave to the outside of the sheave. And that effectively changes your ratio going back to your driven clutch. It's sitting there closed. As it increases, it starts to push it outward, making the belt go inside. That also increases your ratio or changes your gearing ratio. It's a pretty seamless system. So instead of going through your standard gearbox of 5 gears, this one does it for you in 1. All right, first thing we need to do is go ahead and pull the spring out of here. Now to do that, we want to keep a constant pressure on it. To do this, there's a little kit made by EPI, really not that complicated. What it's going to do is just hold pressure on the spring so we can remove that outer plate. Just a little bit of tension on it. All right, the reason we're removing the spring is when you order a new drive clutch, it doesn't come with the spring or the weights. The reason for that is vehicle specific. There may be 2 or 3 different machines that you can actually use this particular drive clutch on, but each one of them is going to be set up differently as to the spring requirements and what type of weights that they're actually using. So we need to pull that apart. When you pull this top plate, you need to make sure that you mark it just somewhere in between this outer plate and the clutch itself. Reason being, it needs to go back in the same place. We can go ahead and pull these 6 10mm bolts. All right, there's the spring we're talking about. What we want to do is get it out of the way. Then I want to remount this outer plate because I want to feel what kind of wear is on this inner bushing, because that's typically where they wear out. All right, let's see what we have on this one. And guys, this one is actually in pretty good condition. So you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down so I can show you the lack of play that I'm seeing. All right, see that? It'll rock just a little bit. All right, what I'm going to do is remove this one, and down on my bench I actually have another one off a different machine. We're going to clamp it down. I'm going to show you what a worn one looks like. When this came off the unit, it was making all kind of noise. It just sounded like there was a bunch of ball bearings flying around behind the cover. wasn't engaging very smoothly. You go to accelerate and the unit would just jerk. Top speed was limited because the sheaves weren't opening and closing fully. Just basically a mess. All right, you see it's hard to even push up. And plus you can sit there and just rock it back and forth. Now if you look inside here on the sheaves, I mean, the surfaces actually have grooves cut in them, and they're actually rough. So this one obviously had some dirt or contaminants in there, and it just chewed it apart. So this is an example of one that you need to replace. All right, first we're going to remount our old one. We've already gotten the spring out of it, but what I need to go after now are these weights. The surfaces on these weights actually looks really good. What'll happen, these will get worn down over time, won't be smooth, they'll be loose inside there and won't push out like they're supposed to. All right, the weights are just held in by this one little pivot pin. You've got a 2mm Allen on one side and a 10mm locking bolt on the other end. What we're going to be looking for is to make sure that the actual pivot point on the weight itself isn't worn out. All right, if it gets stuck as you're trying to pull it through, because it's got some maybe corrosion or rust on it, put pressure on it with a pick tool and just turn it. Doesn't take a lot of pressure. That'll get it on out of there. If you do have to replace these, you want to make sure that you order the exact same ones, because for this particular assembly you've got 4 different types that can be used depending on how you're using the machine and how you want the clutch to respond. So my advice, don't tread over there. You want to go back with what Polaris sent it out with. All right, your new assembly actually comes with new bolts already in it with those new locking nuts on the end. If you are rebuilding your existing one and you were looking at the weights, Polaris and I would recommend to at least replace the locking nut as well as that pivot point, because it'll start to wear in there and the weights won't go through their full range of movement like they should. All right, with our weights in place, we need to go ahead and get that spring back in. And like we did on the original one, we need to go ahead and mark where this is positioned, because it is balanced and it needs to go back in that same position. All right, at this point, get your spring, make sure it's seated flat, put it on your upper plate, and we'll start cranking it down, making sure your X's are aligned. I'm a big fan of these little impact tools when it comes to taking them apart, or anything apart, but I'm also a big fan of putting it back together using your arms, because some of these little boogers, they can produce too much torque and strip out your threads. And in my book, that's not worth it. Just release the tension. Now she's going to be ready to go. So let me get this teardown bench out of the way, grab our driven clutch. Let's get it put back together. So basically assembly is just a reverse of what we did to take it apart. So we'll start by getting the drive clutch on. It's a tapered fit. Want to make sure that you've got that outer lock washer, that washer, and most importantly this little piece right here, which is basically just a shim. Make sure it didn't get left in that old clutch assembly. Remember, it is reverse thread, And the torque it's going to want is 47 foot-pounds, and that is 18 millimeter. There you go. To brace it, I'm just using a 3/8 extension. All right, the bolt for our driven clutch is going to be at 37 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. And it is a 15 millimeter. All right, next we just need to get on our driven clutch. There we go. Next, get on your drive belt. Make sure you can read Polaris going this direction, left or right. Next, the retaining bolt, make sure you've got this large washer. You've got a couple of adjustment shim washers in here, that larger one, and then that smaller one on the inside. Make sure all that's together when you go to put it in there. If you want to see how to set the torque on the driven clutch bolt, please reference our drive belt replacement video. All right, guys, just for fun, before I put this cover on, how about I go ahead and start it up, and then you could watch it actually go through its motions as far as riding out on this, the drive pulley, and going on the inside of the driven one. It's kind of cool to watch. I want to caution you, though, if you do this, definitely wear some type of eye protection, because those are going to be spinning very fast, and you don't want anything flying out and lodging in your eyeball. So let's get it started up and run it through its paces. All right, so that's what it looks like when these clutch systems are actually operating. Kind of cool, huh? All right, from this point, the rest of it's just the reverse of what I did in the beginning. I'm just going to reinstall this cover and then put on this frame strut. All right, guys and gals, I've got our cover reinstalled, all those 10 millimeter bolts back in there, got our frame strut back in place, and other than putting the tires back on this, it's ready to roll. If there was something that I did that you couldn't see, just leave that in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to explain whatever I may have missed or not explained correctly. And if you need any of these parts, come see us at Partzilla.com. And until next time, we just want to say thanks for watching.